Hello?
Yeah, hi.
Better?
Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you. It's snowing here.
You know,
Pretty hard,
weirdly,
actually.
well, it's not snowing hard here, but it is snowing.
Is it really?
Yeah. Well, it snowed this morning. There is snow upon the earth.
Well, that's always a fun thing when that happens in Oregon.
Okay. So today's kind of a big day. We didn't do a show last week because you did that thing where you didn't want to talk to me, and then this. And
I did that thing where I was enjoying the sun in Santa Barbara.
Well, potato.
So nice. Man, it was so
what are
nice.
you doing? You were arm candy, right?
Yeah, I was just the arm candy. Yep, that's right.
Traveling with your lovely bride.
I was the trophy husband.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was fun. I do recommend, by the way, that you take this time of year and just at least a couple of days go hit a warm climate like that. It's good for the soul.
True.
But I digress.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, we missed that. We were going to talk about Pinterest.
That's right.
On the list. Yeah, you seem pretty fired up about Pinterest. Today is the big day. It's March 1st, and that means it's the day that all of the Google privacy policies are unifying.
Yeah, that's right.
And so there's a lot of sort of hue and cry about the data, your data. Where do you get your data? What have they done to, unify your data? I think Google has been pretty good about it, but we could talk about that. Oscars, I'm so interested in what you think always. I don't know. What do you have on your list of things?
I had a whole bunch of things. I think we should, I had a couple of things I really wanted to get into, but I don't want to bring them up, until I think the stuff you brought up, I think we should see how far we get with that. And then, I've got some other just sort of thoughts and so some things I'd like to pick your brain about. But I want to say about this Google privacy thing that I and this is just, I guess, it is a side comment, but it's just kind of interesting. And we just, it's sort of hard to predict, a year from now, 2 years from now, when it comes to things like online privacy, because it wasn't long ago that we were more or less saying, well, Facebook, there's all this concern about privacy, and these guys really seem to be just kind of dicking around with their users, and things are changing. Everyone's upset, at various times because the rules keep shifting and blah, blah, blah. But it was like, in the back of our minds, well, we know Google we're using Google more than we're using Facebook in general. And Google has been around longer and has built enormous databases, and we don't know what they know about us, but we're not as concerned about them. And then, this privacy change came along, which is apparently all about, as it always is, about advertising and money. So there's a hue and a cry, and I think that the vast majority of people don't really know, and I don't really know, what all the changes are about, other than, and this is where I'll kind of throw it to you to tell us what you know, but it appears that it's mostly about sharing data between Google products so that your use, say with the Google search, is paired with your use of Google Plus, which is paired with your use of YouTube, so that their ability to target you is sort of magnified instead of being siloed, which it apparently has been.
Yeah, that's my understanding too. I mean, there, I think you sort of have to look at this as more of a philosophical change than a technical change first. Not to understate the technical change. There's a significant technical change, but it's a philosophical change in product direction at Google, I think. And you can see what has been going on over the last year. There has been a significant kind of unifying of themes across Google products. Instead, what Google was before the change was a search company that also had a bunch of standalone products like Maps and Docs and Voice and all these other little products that, some were more popular than others. But I think by and large, most people thought that that search was, Google's primary business, and everything else was, as Steve Jobs puts it, a hobby. And this change is, oh my gosh, we've got all these products and we've got all this data, and we need to find a way to take all these products and put them into one big package. It's like, it's like the point when Microsoft says, you know what, we have Word and we have Excel and we have PowerPoint, and we should sell them in one box and call that Office. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, is what we're seeing. This privacy policy sort of is a change that kind of leads the charge, that says now we have one privacy policy for a vast number of Google products. And you really should, user, start seeing Google as the suite of products like Office, and not Search and Docs and Voice and all these independent products. Because when you're using Google, you're using something far more than search. And that's what I think what this change today represents is a change in philosophy and a change in how we should be looking at Google.
Well, and the truth is, Pete, and this, I don't know if this is true for you or not, but if you would have told me a month ago that Google's already doing that, I would have thought, well, of course they are. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean this massive, I mean, I wouldn't have known that there was a policy change needed or whatever, but I would have made the assumption that there is at least a little spillover between, I don't know, your search and say your YouTube use. But I guess here's the concern that I've heard, and tell me how, I guess on a technical basis or whatever, this change affects something like this. I have heard a concern that people on one level don't mind if Google knows that you're looking for shoes, or you generally have an interest in horses, or whatever, and that's sort of shared between things that between Google products that you use, so that you're served ads that match your interests. But that people get concerned when they think, let's say you're doing a search for a health concern of some kind, that maybe is information that they start to get scared that they think Google is tracking. But how is today different than yesterday in that regard?
Well, today is different in that regard, because as soon as you search for something in the main Google search product, like, I'm interested in, horse bridles in search, and I get certain search results, then the next time I go into YouTube, that data, my history on search for horse bridles, will may be used to help define
suggest videos
that are then related to things that I have been interested in the past, and then serve me relevant ads related to that. Now, there was an interesting story in Facebook that I think on Facebook that I think really illustrates how this works, and it was the guy who posted a link to a massive amount of sexual lubricant as just a link on his Facebook page. But his friends then started to report that they were seeing ads for sexual lubricant on their feeds because they were friends with him. Right? When they would.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
yeah,
that's it. I mean, he was posting an information link to his network of friends, and now his network of friends see him associated with these Facebook stories that they're looking to promote as stories as ads, and so that's the kind of more of the connection that I think we're going to see. Whether you're talking about horse bridles or sexual lubricant, your searches become very relevant in the content that you're going to see served to you.
So I think for
all products.
So for those people, I think for that group, I would guess that from here forward, their use of Facebook will be more deliberate and less casual than it was in the past. That they may think, or you know what I mean, that that there may be some unintended consequences of sharing a certain casual link or something like that. So I would imagine, I guess I say that because I would imagine that as we watch both Facebook and Google, which are pretty ubiquitous, in terms of the amount of time people are spending online with those two entities, that in a number of different ways, let's just say over the next year, you will feel less inclined to be frivolous with, I guess just in general, your use of those products if you see them have ramifications across products or with friends you're linked to or with ads you get. You know what I mean? Like, I just think in general, people might be more careful and deliberate. I don't think that's a good thing, but
you're such an idealist. I totally think you're an idealist on that point. I think you are saying that because you desperately want people to be more considerate of these things. I don't think they will be. I think they are as oblivious today, March 1st, as they were yesterday when they were looking at links of sexual lubricant on their friend's page.
I don't know. I mean, I don't say it to be idealistic and because I think that's not a great side effect. I think that
no.
I think that we should feel totally free, to search and share and watch and obviously within our own sort of moral confines or whatever. But I think when you see something have an unintended consequence that makes you feel like maybe a little self-conscious in some way, or a little embarrassed, or a little, I don't know, or something is becoming less effective because, gee, why am I seeing all these stupid ads? It's probably because I did that. And maybe you decide to do things like do certain searches logged out of Google or with your privacy setting on or something.
Yeah, so go into that incognito mode.
And not because you're doing something wrong, but because you see a cumulative impact of the profile and sort of the personality you're creating, and maybe you want it to be effective. I don't now that level there, I think, is just people who really are, like you said, more conscious of things, and most people aren't. But I do think, you kind of look at what does this really mean, and I don't think that's any sort of serious impact, but.
There's a fantastic, oh man, we should post a link to this. Have you read The Information Diet, Clay Johnson's book? Go get it. Like, seriously, go get your little iPad and go get it. Right. Right. Like, you can do it now. Because it's important. And I think it's another sort of philosophy. I ran across Clay Johnson. I think he was, it was a couple months ago, I think it was. He was a guest on the Twit Network's Triangulation show, where he sat down with Tom Merritt and Leo Laporte, and they talked for an hour about the information diet. And I think, I'm gonna read just the blurb here off the book. Healthy information consumption habits are about more than productivity and efficiency. They're about your personal health and the health of society. Just as junk food can lead to obesity, junk information can lead to new forms of ignorance. The information diet provides a framework for consuming information in a healthy way by showing you what to look for, what to avoid, and how to be selective. In the process, author Clay Johnson explains the role information has played throughout history and why following his prescribed diet is essential in today's information age. And I think there's a really fascinating kind of thing that emerges here, and it was summed up by Ev Williams, founder of lots of things, blogger was a big one, which is this: unconscious consumption squanders our precious attention. But those words, unconscious consumption, are really important in the context of this discussion we're having about what Google is doing, right? When you click on links, when you read so I'm just going to go to Huffington Post, which, last week you realize I can no longer search for.
Right.
So you go to Huffington Post and you pick up the latest the latest ads, Jon Stewart mocks CNN, Fox News primary coverage. Gosh, I need to find the
nude, who wore a nude dress on the red carpet.
Yeah, exactly. Girls' Day Out.
Have you noticed, by the way, anytime somebody wears a dress that color, everyone, BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, so all the junk media outlets, they are going for that headline with the word nude as the color of dress.
Exactly. Okay, here you go. Apple users really are more fashionable. Okay, so I just clicked on that link, right? That was, I clicked on it unconsciously because I bought into the headline. Right? That was unconscious consumption.
Yeah.
And so I may read the first paragraph. I might think, oh, that is really dumb. But what I don't see is what's going on in the background, which is all of this data about my activity is being served back to key people. It's being served back to Google, or key organizations, not people. It's being served back to Google in terms of it's being served back to Google in terms of my data. It's being served to Facebook if my Huffington Post is enabled to my Facebook data. It's being served back to the Huffington Post in terms of Google, of their analytics and their most popular articles. And it's then being served back to writers who are like, God, I really would love to write the next American novel, but people don't want to read that. They want to read the garbage that I'm reading, as evidenced by the fact that they keep clicking on this damn stuff. Right? So that's what the information diet is saying. It's saying by unconsciously just clicking on these things, you are sending incredibly specific signals to the creators of this content that you want more of it. Even if you don't comment on it, you are saying you want more of it. And it's now because of things like this Google privacy policy change coming into play here that are going to only increase, or I should say decrease friction in the flow of data across all of these different products inside of Google, and now, just as this relationship with Huffington Post and Facebook, and
well, you know who else is doing this, by the way, and I just read this morning on TechCrunch. I'm just telling you because I'm not up to speed on how Twitter is evolving with their advertising, but there's some interesting things going on. But Twitter is pairing its interest graph now with ads. And what they're doing, I guess what they're saying about it is, we're not quite as advanced or specific in terms of how you can target people as Facebook, where you can, sort of click a few boxes and select a demographic. But what they're doing is a little more difficult, a little more, what's the word? In mathematic terms, I mean, it's a little more complex, I guess, but
that's a good mathematical term.
I was looking for the one that's
the bigger one.
Anyway, I'm digging a hole, but but it's a little more complex anyway. Where they're doing that essentially, they're who do you follow, obviously, and then just trying to build. And obviously build an algorithm, I guess, that does all this, but not just who you follow, but what you seem to click on and what stories you seem to like, and how everyone's sort of matched up, and so that, I guess, in really basic terms, it's you're sort of creating a profile for yourself that then they can kind of act on from an advertising perspective. But a quick couple of facts here: Google or Twitter's ad initiative is only 18 months old. So they're still, they've got 100 million users. I think that's right, compared to Facebook's 800 million. But last year, I don't have last year's numbers. They're on track to earn 260 million in 2012 for their marketing. And they say 2011 was really just the year they began scaling, but they're looking to demonstrate that they're a juggernaut in 2012. A promoted trend on Twitter goes for $120,000 a day in the U.S. Oh, it's an expensive thing to buy.
And that is crazy.
Yeah. So kind of interesting, but anyway, so they're in a part of what they're doing. They're obviously already, building their advertising and earning revenue, but everything we've been talking about here with Google and Facebook and what you really just said about Huffington Post and how they all interrelate, Twitter is kind of creating their own machine to essentially create your profile, understand who you are. And which, I guess 10 years ago to say, an online company would have a complete defined definition for who you are as a person based on your use, would really not go over well, I think, 10 years ago if you told somebody that. But you can see how it happens and why it happens, and you can see that there might be benefits. I read about this, all the work that they're doing, and I'm sure they've got many, many very smart people really building this, and it probably would be pretty freaky if they said, well, Dane, here's what we know about you. And if they were close to correct, that would seem a little spooky. But wasn't it, what was it, about a month ago that the FBI was asking for help or whatever to try to get access to those profiles, to on one level just learn where things are happening so that they can get information faster and know where hotspots and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But on another level, trying to actually profile specific people so that, and I can't remember the term they used, but there was some term of art for somebody who is sort of somebody who kind of like that that Philip Dick novel, Tom Cruise movie,
Minority
Report, where you're sort of guessing in advance what someone might do.
Pre-crime.
Pre-crime. I mean, that's kind of what it comes across as. I'm sure at this stage it's nowhere near that, but you start to think that, right? If Twitter can say to you a year from now, here's who you are, what you like, what you do, when you do it, where you do it at, and if by the time they're done telling you that, you say, holy crap, then the fact that the FBI is maybe linking into that and might know the same information starts to get a little creepy.
Well, it is. I think there are two things going on. The first one is this issue of, as soon as you drop the FBI bomb, right? Mm-hmm. That becomes a different conversation, right? It becomes.
But I'm not making it up, right? You're familiar with what they were doing.
Well,
or saying.
It would just based on the, if you put big enough computers to, attach big enough computers to the internet, you will be able to mine an awful lot of fascinating and detailed private information that was never intended to be public, but is public by default and by default by ignorance, and so I think there is, we don't read privacy policies well. And I find myself doing the same thing, services that are really darn compelling and would not work unless you made connections between these software applications and separate companies, you would not get the same benefit of a connected society if you don't say yes some of the time to things that, if you sit back more soberly, that you think you might think differently about it, and so that's one side of the discussion. The other one is, are you actively sending the wrong signals by just the stuff that you do online, to content creators and to advertisers who think that you really are interested in, 1,500 pounds of sexual lubricant just because you clicked a link unconsciously. One of the reasons I go back to the Clay Johnson book is because, it brings up a really interesting point. And I think about this in the classroom. So when I'm in front of students and I see students who come back with primary, what they call primary source material as, Wikipedia, I have a problem with that when they come back with, Newsweek as primary source material and Huffington Post where they got all their best links for their papers. I have a problem with that. And it's not necessarily because the individual information, nuggets of data that they pulled out of these sources might be wrong. It's that I know that these students don't have a well-exercised critical thinking muscle, right? They aren't able to dig past the first thing that they read. And I think that's a cultural shift that we're seeing.
No, and in my mind, it's kind of gone the opposite of the direction I thought it would go. I thought we'd be smarter and have smarter sources as we got more sources and as people had a greater appetite for information. But it's gone the opposite direction. I mean, I remember, being in school and there was an assumption that you were going to have fairly limited periodical resources for papers, like some major papers and magazines, and that your job, I guess, as a student or a researcher or whatever, was to try to detect or understand a bias in the reporter or, I don't know, a history of validity or whatever. But it wasn't so difficult. But what you're saying, somebody pulls in sort of an aggregated source that's been rehashed maybe 4 times by the time it hits something like Huffington Post. They aren't taking, a career journalist and trying to make assumptions about bias or whatever. They really have a job to say, well, what really was the original source of this? And then, was it fact checked? It's a lot more complicated, and it appears that it's that as it's gotten more complicated, people have gotten lazier about doing that.
Well, and that's, I think, the curse of riches, right? I mean, it's like we have access to so much information, and it's so easy to get that going for the low-hanging fruit becomes the norm. So, I think back to there are a couple of things that have happened this week in addition to Google's, privacy change going on today. Personally, are you freaked out by the privacy change? Is that something that concerns you?
No, it's not. Not necessarily, but I think that I'm fairly deliberate anyways so I don't feel like I'm creating a profile actively that I am concerned about. And I also don't feel like there's any activity I'm doing online that, that would, it's going to be, I guess, Pete, if something funky happens, like, I don't know, like some ripple effect occurs that makes me very self-conscious or something like that. That's maybe more my concern. I'm not really thinking, Big Brother quite yet, but I do sort of, the more I sort of think this through and hear about it, the more I think that I want to be sort of in charge of this personality profile. And so you bring up, the information diet. Well, it sounds like not just a novel concept, but actually a really important concept, and is, sort of relating to, there's going to sources of information and unconsciously clicking, but feeling like, whatever. I clicked on an Apple story and I clicked on whatever. Those are my interests.
Yeah, there's parallel is sometimes I eat crap,
Right. But the notion that we all should be thinking about it more deliberately, like we think about the food that we eat and the impact it has on us physically, that's probably a much more important concept than a whole lot of people are ready to understand.
I think so. I think it's really ahead of its time, the whole concept. It's a critical thinking concept. It's something we have forgotten from, our earliest education when we were, originally taught how to discern the good from the bad, and applying that same, that same level of cognition to information is a massive challenge. It is not easy. It is not low-hanging fruit type stuff. But and so I'm with you. I mean, I'm not really sweating this from a personal privacy issue. I don't do, Google knows a lot about me. I have had Google history, web history turned off on my Google Apps account. So if you go to, I think it's just google.com/history, while you're logged in, it'll tell you if it's turned on or not. And mine is turned off. So Google hasn't been collecting information on me. I actually didn't know this. I thought it was turned on. But you can go in there and empty your history. That's why this is less of a sort of a freaky thing to me than than some of these other information diet concepts and critical thinking and information digestion concepts. Because what they're doing technically is, I mean, Google's not going to start selling your information, they say, to outside users. What they're doing is just aggregating your use across Google products so that they can make new assumptions about who you are based on what you do. And that's inside of Google. And I think there is a cultural danger, not so much a technical one, for the vast majority of users out there. So that's one. But man, Google, what happened last week with this subverting third-party cookies thing in Safari, particularly on on iOS? Did you see this?
No, I did not. What is this?
Well, okay. So, there's a setting in browsers. You know what a cookie is.
Uh-huh.
You know about the cookies.
Yeah.
So there is a setting in modern browsers where you have this opportunity to turn off.
To make it private.
To make it more or less private, or to make sure to say that I don't want users, or I don't want advertisers to be able to leave cookies in my browser. I don't want them to be able to track me based on in my browser. When I visit a website that has a third-party ad, like, so I'm on a search engine land page right now, and I see a Covario ad, island ad on the right column, right sidebar. I don't want Covario or the advertiser representing Covario to be able to leave a cookie on my site because I visited search engine land. Does that make sense? To leave a cookie in my browser.
Is that different than trying to just turn, say, Safari's private browser on while you do a search or while you spend 5 minutes online? Is it a setting separate than that? Are we talking about the same thing? Well, there is a setting
different, separate from that. And like if you go into Safari, on Lion, the options are block cookies, and there are 3 options. Never, so you'll accept any cookie from anyone. Always, you'll accept no cookies from anyone, which actually affects your ability to use sites that you do visit, and from third parties and advertisers, right? Which means essentially the former setting was from visited, which means, or from, it was from visited, I think, on iOS, where it's, I don't want those ancillary third-party plugin or cookies being left on my machine.
And it's a default setting, block cookies from third parties and advertisers.
That is a default, and that is also the from visited is the default on iOS too. So that's the sort of landscape, right? That's the setting right now. And so it came out 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago, something like that, that Google had circumvented this setting in order to leave cookies from their third-party advertising channels, particularly in iOS, to circumvent this user setting, because it was not, they said, an appropriate default. And see, now I'm gonna have to find the original story. I was hoping you would know more about it, so I wouldn't.
I don't.
But it was by what they did was they actually had a hidden form in an iframe that allowed you or that essentially made it an accepted. As soon as you hit the page, it would submit this form. I'm talking in circles about it, but the result of it is, whether or not I get the technical stuff right, is that someone inside of the organization made a decision to actively circumvent a user setting in a competing browser, which would allow more advertising cookies to be left on that user's browser.
And obviously, their opinion about that versus anyone else's opinion about that is way ahead of, I would assume, the law on the issue.
Yeah.
So they can have an opinion, and there's no law that's been worked out on this. And I'm getting really scared, by the way, of courts deciding technical privacy issues.
Oh, it's so bad.
It's not working out well on that level.
It's not working out well. So this issue ends up being, this, I think, more significant for Google. I wish it was more significant for Google than even the privacy policy change, because what it means is there is a force at work in this company whose mission was just don't be evil, don't do stuff that is, could be categorized as evil, and they're doing stuff that really is evil. And when they do things like that, right, when they do things like circumventing user privacy settings in competing browsers, it makes it much more difficult to trust that they are going to do things with my best interests in mind on their other products. That's my point of all of this.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I get a little caught up just thinking about, I mean, for a long time, as I understand it, Silicon Valley really didn't do a great job of influencing politics, I guess, of hiring lobbyists and paying off political parties to serve their own interest, and I guess for better or worse, because in a lot of ways I think they've been left alone, and that's been good in a lot of ways, but in other ways I think they're now getting ahead of things that I think should be sort of national debate issues, so that laws can be made without district courts setting precedent. But what I see recently has me a little concerned. I mean, you have Chris Dodd is the MPAA director. I know that's not a technology company, but they just got behind a very scary piece of technology legislation. Two pieces, I guess. The privacy. What was it called? The privacy something. You were very hot about it.
Oh, SOPA and PIPA?
SOPA and PIPA. Yes. It's like two little dogs.
You were very hot about it?
You were very hot about that one. Anyway, so, and then Google, I just noticed, hired a former congresswoman, Republican, and things like that, where you have this, we're at this point that massive money's is at play, and Google is, like you said, less about sort of a simple business direction and a don't be evil, and more about how can we make the most amount of money, because now we've got some serious online ad competition with the likes of Facebook and Twitter and others. So I just sort of I'm concerned at this point about how laws might be made, and I maybe wouldn't worry quite as much about it, except for the way that SOPA and PIPA played out, and how totally clueless almost every legislator who said anything about it was.
That's really the problem, and I think that came out in the SOPA legislation. I mean, I was stuck on C-SPAN watching them talk about this, and it was so obvious that not only was, and this goes back to the information diet. I think in many respects the best target for something like the information diet really would be our representatives, because these are clearly people who A, don't understand what they're talking about when it comes to technology, and B, don't have the kind of technology resources in their own offices to be able to educate them on the
who is the chief sponsor of SOPA?
Well, hold on, but the third one is, that was like Lamar. I think it was Lamar Smith, wasn't it?
Just someone who never even uses email.
Well, that's it, because the third and most insidious piece that comes out of this, the biggest problem for me, is that the people who are making this legislation have no respect for those who do make the technology. We're not going to bring the nerds in. Those sorts of comments show a distinct lack of respect for those who are actually working hard to build the networks and the technologies that actually make things happen.
It's a real problem.
It's a real problem. It's a huge problem. So that's more on my soapbox. But I would say I want to get back to this cookies and privacy thing. Originally, this was a Wall Street Journal report on Google's iPhone tracking, they call it, and we'll post a link in the show notes for this one. And John Battelle wrote a response. And John Battelle, he's an advertiser and has a very vested interest in advertisers having access to your use history and thus cookies. And then John Gruber wrote a wonderful sort of follow up to both of these, a long one which we'll also post that gives the kind of the background and some analysis of the tracking. So we'll post that too. My description of what is actually going on is really lacking, and I acknowledge that, but it's really worth reading.
And can we just say, without getting too sidetracked before we leave the topic, that this whole notion of the overlapping between privacy issues and your personal I don't know whether it's information consumption or information sharing, and advertisers and media companies gets a whole different level of scary when you consider the ongoing controversy with News of the Day and The Sun and all of the Murdoch properties, and information still spilling out about paying off sources and paying off police and hacking phones, and I assume there was some email hacks as well. I wonder if there's some folks in large media organizations who are following some of this and just can't help but think, how do we surreptitiously glean story information from this evolving and sort of undefined landscape?
Yeah. Well, I wonder, wasn't it was it a TED Talk or the guy who wrote the book on how psychopaths, like there is a higher incidence of psychopathy in the
Psychopathy.
highest psychopathy.
Don't know.
In the highest ranks of major corporations, like CEOs are much more likely to be psychopaths.
I didn't hear the talk, but yes, I read a synopsis, and yes, yeah, right.
I mean, I'm not calling Murdoch a psychopath, mostly because if he is, that's risky.
Right. he probably he's probably got a unit somewhere in Australia that's listening, sort of NSA style to comments.
I should
like
check
that.
our analytics, because I may need to warn our users based on their cookies.
Yikes. No, I know. I think it was sort of Wall Street. Well, if you ever watched the movie The Smartest Men in the Room, the documentary about Enron,
yeah.
And it really gets in. And the guy I think who sheds the most light on the trading floor, the nature of the trading floor, is the guy from Portland, who I seems like he was doing it from Portland somehow. I'm not sure, but they interviewed the guy from Portland who talked about, and then of course they talked about how people behaved and what kinds of personality and then the narrators threw in some other data and how they really were exclusively men. So the Enron energy trading floor, which they essentially created, and that in turn destroyed their company. Well, in part, that's part of what it was, but though it was all men, and so there's no real data. I mean, they didn't bring in psychiatrists to diagnose people, but the behavior was very sociopathic. So things like, let's shut down the grid in California, regardless of the consequences to the people who live there on a hot day in the summer. It will boost our profits. Do it. Happened all the time.
Yeah.
And when you watch that and then hear the talk that you're referring to,
not psychopathy, but sociopathy.
They're not terribly different, are they?
I just want to make sure I have both words out there, because one of them is likely wrong.
Well, okay. So we're going to be right on one.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Sociopath, I think, is probably more. It's an easier one to lay on somebody. I know that. They have a really hard time actually diagnosing someone as a psychopath. But so sociopath, I would say, is probably more relevant. But what do I know? Anyway, but when you hear some more advanced research about say traders or CEOs or the very wealthy, it surprises me not so much. I you know what I mean? Like I just sort of, I think at one point maybe I would have been reticent to believe it, but I don't have much trouble starting to make those connections.
Well, yeah, which comes, I think, from further distance from the actual, impacted audience, right? And I think a lot of the same decisions get made about big data when you are not connected with the people sitting in their living rooms on their home computers. You end up, when you have lost your connection between sort of how the decisions of what you do with their data. When you no longer have that sort of relationship with them, you're able to make decisions that are that might otherwise be classified as sociopathic.
Well, and I know you aren't speaking quite to this, but it's something for companies to think about as they rely more on data. And I mean, I think over the years, a lot of companies didn't do a very good job anyways of understanding their consumer or their customer or their target market for various reasons. And as more data has become available, it's generally been a good thing that a company can know more and make fewer assumptions about who really uses their product when, and that kind of thing. So that's good. But to your point, there's a lot of areas that this, I think of, as you just said, that the drones, how somebody can be like in California, drive 15 minutes to an office and control a military aircraft and strike, targets, blow things and people up in another part of the world, and then drive home at the end of the night, probably suffering from PTSD. But so obviously that's a whole different level than what you're talking about. But there are relationships, I think, to saying we think we can know everything way out here because we've got enough data to make assumptions, or at least to make decisions. But I would say for just your average size company, there's a danger of not getting face to face with your customer, or focus groups, or really kind of getting down to a level that that makes them more personal, I guess, because you're relying on data.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I've been doing some research here on the differences between sociopathy and psychopathy.
Okay.
And
I always call it psychopathy, but
psychopathy. I don't know. I actually don't know.
I don't know.
I would ask Google to do the pronunciation thing for me, but I don't want them to know that I'm searching for it. And so it turns out that, according to, quote, psychologists, sociopaths tend to be nervous and easily agitated, are likely to be uneducated, and live on the fringes of society, unable to hold down a steady job or stay in one place. Psychopaths, on the other hand, often have charming personalities. They're manipulative and easily gain people's trust. So I think that's what we're talking about.
So it must be psychopaths, yeah.
They are easily
where are you reading
able
this?
to mimic emotion, so they can appear normal to other people.
So Ted Kaczynski, sociopath. Ted Bundy, psychopath.
Exactly.
Got it.
So
okay, well that helps us.
That's what I've got. That's the diagnosis of the week.
So speaking of the fringes of society, we don't have a ton of time left. I wanted to talk about Pinterest.
Okay.
And it's apparently pronounced Pinterest, as in Pinterest.
Pinterest. Like I am a Pinteresting person.
So I brought this up a couple of weeks ago because I had all of a sudden seen, I guess, some comments about it. It was not on my radar whatsoever. And you had, I noticed, made some comment, I guess, on Facebook about it. And so I thought, well, I'll bring that up. I don't know exactly. There are some people I like that I follow online or whatever that were getting pretty jazzed about it, and they were female and you were a male, and I just thought, well, wait a minute, what am I missing? So I did some little bit of research on their website, and then after speaking to you, did some other research, read some articles. Obviously, started a little account and pinned some things. It is pretty fascinating. And I'll throw this out. I know you've got a lot of opinions about this. I can share, kind of what my experience was like early on, what I liked about it, and some of the things I've read. But what surprised me is that it's been around for quite some time.
Long time, yeah.
But is now, like, I think it doubled in January, and it's picking up even more speed in February, and I don't have February's data, but January it doubled.
Mm-hmm.
Its users doubled
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden.
Overnight success that took just 8 years. That
is really fascinating.
So what's your impression of the service?
So as I signed up, apparently, unless I'm missing something, it appeared very obvious. You can only sign up with either a Facebook or Twitter account, right? Did I miss something?
Wow.
Those appeared to be my only two options.
I'm seeing more and more of that. I can't confirm that is the only option. Let me see. When I sign, I'm going to log out and see if I can. I can't recall if there's a way for.
There were two very obvious options, and I looked around for another way to do it, and I couldn't see one.
Huh.
So I chose to sign up through my Facebook account, which might help explain perhaps the rate of growth. If they've actually made some change along those lines, I'm not sure there.
Well, now that they have a Facebook app, it shows up very clearly on your timeline what your pin activity is.
Yeah, and so that's the whole deal. I mean, now it's an integrated part of Facebook. It forces you to upgrade to the timeline on Facebook, and then it has this nice little space there near the top of your timeline that is just your Pinterest activity, which is kind of. I liked that. If I have an article, for instance, that I think is interesting, I don't necessarily have to make that part of my Facebook news feed to everybody, which, by the way, statistics are only 16% of your friends see your posts. So I just read that this morning. But anyway, so there's an article, or there's a picture, or there's something I think is interesting. I can keep it in sort of that Pinterest framework. I guess it can still find its way into the news feed, but probably with less weight, I would assume, or maybe more to people that we have a Pinterest connection, back and forth with. But it creates sort of a way to, I'm trying to think of the word, like compartmentalize some of your sharing, so that you're doing it in that format, but it's sort of, there's a crossover. But I feel like I can share more things, or do, like, I'm very self-conscious about, posting 5 things in a day on Facebook. I think it's too much, and I know that's just my own opinion, but that's the way I feel. Pinterest, I don't feel that way. I feel like, I can go in and post 10 things, and I'm not overwhelming somebody else with my sharing,
because it's much more of a browsing community than
exactly.
Yeah.
In the same way maybe Twitter is. I mean, you could post 30 things in Twitter, and you're really not going to be bothering anybody.
It's interesting. I was finding about Twitter, there was I think it used to be when I would cover an event, it's like putting way too much weight on what I do on Twitter. But it used to be when there would be an event, I'd go to a conference or something, I'd use Twitter and I would tweet a lot. I'm using Twitter to catalog kind of the inner monologue of my head, and whether other people like that or not, so be it. It used to be that I would, I would tweet like that and maybe go, weeks or months tweeting a couple of times a day, and then an event would come and I'd tweet 200 times. And I would lose a lot of followers, right? Because apparently at some point people follow you on Twitter when you don't post stuff, right? And then you flood their Twitter stream, and suddenly they unfollow you. They don't like being overwhelmed by stuff like that. Well, The Oscars just happened, and I do the other show, Movies We Like, and so Andy Nelson, the host there, and I were using Twitter to provide our own running commentary of the Oscars telecast, and I didn't lose any followers In fact, I may have even gained some, which I thought was really interesting. It's almost as if that sensitivity maybe is being mitigated by volume. Like people are, as you say, they're not seeing everything because the stream is going by so fast, and maybe they're not as impacted directly by tweets. Or people have put me in a filter list that they're just not seeing anything I do anymore, and it doesn't matter. So either of those things could be true.
But they're always something to think about in my mind. And so I kind of, I enjoyed, I created these little interest compartments. I didn't do it. I did this. I set this up right before I left for vacation, and didn't touch it on vacation. Mm-hmm. So one of the things it did, by the way, as you might imagine, is as you sign up through your Facebook, it finds all of your Facebook friends who are on Pinterest, and you're automatically following them.
Yeah.
And then it does its own sort of, well, based on your interests, we're going to also have you following these other people that you don't know. And then you start, over time getting those people following you back. So I don't know what sort of a bond that creates in terms of this information sharing, but they're people that I'm interested in. I mean, it's, so it's kind of, that's worked out okay. I did read something I thought was quite interesting while I was on vacation. I think it might have been in the LA Times, but it was an article about Pinterest and how it was partly about how fast it's growing and how I don't know how important it's becoming, but also how it seems to be more addictive than many of the other social properties. And that there was an example of, I guess, a college professor who had made the assignment for a course that they had to post everything on Pinterest. So instead of turning in papers, I guess. I don't know what the course was, and there were apparently several people in the class who were really concerned about that because they were actively trying to wean themselves from a pretty severe Pinterest addiction.
Wow.
I didn't feel that way. I didn't feel any compulsiveness about it. But it seems that men, it's more female dominant than male, but males are adopting pretty rapidly right now.
Yeah.
But it seems to have a different, I don't know, a different meaning, I suppose, to women than to men.
Well, it satisfies, I think it satisfies that visual nerve, right? I mean, for people who really, and I think many of us are really, we're visual beings. We take in so much of what brings us meaning through our eyes that to go to Pinterest and have this just visual onslaught of, whether it's infographics or haircut styles or, links to websites, they're all presented so visually that I think it's naturally appealing, sort of genetically appealing. And I think that may be something that causes. Well,
and I think
it's very much a browsing network. I mean, that's why it doesn't feel like you're ever getting sort of overwhelmed by how many people you follow. Following is not really a concern on Pinterest because it's more based on browsing and search.
Yeah. So you can spend all kinds of time. I think, and this I think may or may not, but I think it may explain how women maybe become a little more addicted to it or more had a higher early adoption to it. Somebody that I was reading said something to the effect that that Pinterest is this great space for people, and the article really was written about for women. In that Facebook is sort of a place to say, well, here's what I did, or here's how I felt, or here's what someone said, or something like that. But Pinterest is a place to say, here's who I am.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So you sort of are collecting these, I love this fabric and I love this dress and I love this hotel and I love this. And so now the profile you've built is, this is who I am. And you're sharing it in this visual and kind of pretty and fun and maybe somewhat whimsical way that might explain a little more of the emotional attachment that women have to their Pinterest experience, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Because it's much more tied into identity.
Exactly.
There is a ComScore released an infographic based on January 2012 data saying that Pinterest and Tumblr were roughly equal in the number of minutes per month users spent on the site at 89. And that doesn't seem like a lot for January use until you compare it to Twitter, which is at 21, LinkedIn 17, MySpace 8, Google Plus 3, Facebook 405.
Ouch.
So people are still spending a lot more time on Facebook in terms of minutes per user. If you want to look at a site inspiring of addiction, it seems like Facebook is the target, but Pinterest is for the overnight success that it has established in the last 8 years. It has it's climbing pretty quickly, and over the last 6 months certainly, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. There is a lot of consternation about the way Pinterest handles sort of repurposing copyright.
I bet.
And I personally, I'm not terribly concerned by that. The stuff that I post of my own material, I've released into Creative Commons, share alike with attribution, non-commercial. And so, for me, it's all about getting the original content that I post on Pinterest out there. And I appreciate the activity that people are taking in repinning, photographs and such. But I can certainly see why, those who are, not in the Creative Commons mindset are having trouble. And I think Pinterest is, it's an interesting pill to have to swallow when you realize that you are, you're fighting an uphill battle if you're trying to keep control of your content and be on the web.
Yeah. No, I can see clearly how that would be a problem. I mean, you're generally taking something that's online anyways, right? But, and has to be shareable, but you're not in control of, its distribution or its use really, or its,
right. Particularly if it's getting shared from a property that isn't yours. I have had to really rethink where I'm sharing from. Because originally I was pinning, from whether I would pin from my Flickr site or pin from Facebook or pin from these other locations. And then I realized, I really want all these links to drive back to my own ownership and my own website at rashpixel.com. And so I had to rethink how my website was set up so that when you click the pin it bookmarklet while visiting my website, it pins the right stuff and brings people back to the site if they were to pin something directly from my website. And that ends up being much more of kind of a content strategy discussion, where if your site isn't set up right, if your site isn't set up and tagged correctly, and if you don't have the right source images that really look best on Pinterest, it can end up hurting you. And you won't be able to use Pinterest to actually help drive awareness of the story you're trying to tell. And so I think that's something that's worth considering.
That's interesting.
So I'm on it, but it's one of those that I get a little bit fatigued by just the nature of it's just another site to pin to or to add to every day. And so I'm really looking at going back on the information diet and really looking at where I share stuff, and maybe, slimming down a little bit.
Yeah. And that's, that for me is always vital, because if I don't do that in terms of, things that I need to be actively involved in or want to be actively involved in sharing, I go from productive to zero real fast. So I always have to be, thinking that through, and I'll ultimately obviously have to determine if this has any long-term value for me to be involved in. So far, for me, the value was if there really are. I mean, I logged in and was encouraged to share, so I did. It's sort of like, hey, you got to, create your categories and whatever, and share something, and use it before you just log in and walk away. So I did, And then I went back a little later in the day and shared a couple of other things because I was getting some responses, and I thought, oh, that's, I don't want to just be, too casual about this. Then I went on vacation and wasn't actively using it. But I guess as I left on vacation, I thought that there was value there in saying, I don't want to spend all day posting to Facebook, but there are things I want to share. I also have a blog that I haven't really been attending to, but it requires a little more. It's a little less visual. It requires a little more work to be active with. Is this, does this supplement that?
Well, that's a good question because, if you are a visual, if your media is primarily visual, Pinterest I can see absolutely how it would supplement it. If you're selling something, if you're like a catalog provider as a brand, Pinterest is the perfect place to go because if you put a price in the description of your pin, it'll actually put a price banner. It says, $10 across the image of your pin on your pin gallery. It makes a beautiful sort of a catalog that now your browsers of your own catalog can actually share quite robustly with their own networks. That's a big deal. I don't know how appropriate it is for every business, but I can see a lot of businesses where Pinterest is where you're going to want to be.
Yeah, that's important to know. And I don't know enough to define those businesses right now. Although I could throw a few out there, like clothing companies. Yeah. I think that would be great. I think it could be really awesome for travel. And I don't think travel I don't see a lot of evidence of, hotels and other sort of hospitality businesses jumping in here, but I can see it really helping something like that. Obviously for photography and other media. But yeah, probably not industrial manufacturing.
No, maybe not yet. Give it time. Anyway.
But yeah.
What else was on your list as we wrap up here? Do you have other stuff you wanted to chat about?
I had a couple of questions I was going to ask you, but I feel like they're going to, I'm just looking quickly through them, and I think they are long discussion topics. So
next week,
one of them is, oh man, honestly, every single one of them, if I even bring them up, but I'm going to bring this one up as a, hey, let's talk about this next week. Been thinking about how unbelievably, what an enormous windfall this new, super PAC Supreme Court decision has been for consultants, ad agencies, and really media outlets. And I start to wonder, I hear, negative things in the news on occasion about super PACs, but as the money rolls in over this next election cycle, I wonder how muted the media is going to be about this being a bad thing, because man, oh man, is it putting money into things like TV ads that apparently, this is what we'll have to talk about, but apparently I've read some very interesting interviews with people who say, yeah, there are smarter things we could do with our money, but we don't have much time. We're getting so much of it, and the people giving it to us want to know we spent it. Yeah. So we do TV because it's the most expensive and the most sort of obvious thing to do.
And we do a lot of TV.
So we're doing more TV than makes sense at all. But, got to spend that money.
Yeah, that's okay. That's definitely a good one for next week, especially when you see how great it's been. The onion has been peeled back on Colbert and The Daily Show.
Yeah, he's been absolutely brilliant. So anyway, I think that's a fun topic.
Totally. It's funny. The more and more I think about what we talk about on the show, really we're two guys in the marketing business who really hate marketing. I think that's how this show has shifted.
That's what makes us so naked. I guess we need to be more naked about our loathing and
loathing of
spite.
our own business. I really am finding myself spiting my own business. I guess that's okay.
I think it's fun.
Yeah. All right. That's good. That's
yeah.
Good.
But that's a very interesting observation.
So
Okay, here's what
deal with
sucks
that this
about
week.
marketing today.
I will. Hopefully, I'll catch you next week if you're not on an excursion.
Oh
Right?
yeah, let's hope.
All right. Bye.
See ya.